Our trip to the mountains was supposed to be a relaxing time, just me and my girlfriend, Emily. We'd been looking forward to this vacation for months. The cabin we rented was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines and thick blankets of snow. The first few days were peaceful. We spent our time skiing down the powdery slopes, laughing as we tumbled into the snow, and warming up by the fireplace in the evenings. It felt safe for the most part. But on the third day, something strange happened. After a long day of skiing, we returned to the cabin, trying to relax. As soon as we stepped inside, I noticed something was off. My jacket, which I had left draped over a chair, was gone. At first, I thought I had misplaced it. But when Emily's scarf and a few other items were also missing, I knew something was wrong. We searched the cabin from top to bottom, but our missing belongings were nowhere to be found. It didn't make sense. No one else had access to the cabin, and we hadn't seen another soul since we arrived. The next day, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, we decided to take one last run down the slopes before heading back. The snow was falling harder now. As we got back to the cabin, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Footprints. They were faint, almost washed away by the falling snow, but they were there. They led from the edge of the woods right up to the front door of our cabin. This isn't the first time strange things were happening here. We hadn't seen anyone around. Who could have left these prints? I glanced at Emily, and the look on her face told me she was just as frightened as I was. We approached the cabin cautiously. The fire had gone out, leaving the room dim and shadowy. That's when I saw them. More footprints. This time they were inside. They started at the front door and led through the living room, past the kitchen, and down the hallway towards the bedroom. The next few hours were a blur of fear and paranoia. We locked ourselves in the bedroom, barricading the door with furniture, but sleep was impossible. I was really worried. The morning light brought no comfort. When we finally mustered the courage to leave the bedroom, we found more signs of the intruder. Our belongings had been rifled through, clothes scattered across the floor, and the windows left slightly open, as if someone had slipped out during the night. We decided it was time to leave. As we packed our bags in a hurry, we heard it, a faint rustling outside. Peering through the window, I saw a man that was looking at us strangely. Without a second thought, we grabbed our bags and ran to the car. Later, we learned that the man had been arrested. He had been living in the woods, breaking into cabins when the occupants were away, stealing whatever he could find. The thought of him lurking so close, watching us, sent chills down my spine. The beach was perfect. My friends and I had been planning this girl's holiday for months, and it felt like a dream come true. The sun was bright, the waves were gentle. Me and my girls were having fun time. Everything felt right, and I couldn't have been happier. But then I realized I had forgotten something back at the apartment. It wasn't a big deal, just a small bag with some sunscreen. I told my friends I'd be back soon and made my way across the beach. When I reached the apartment building, the lobby was empty, and the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. I pressed the button for the elevator and waited, tapping my foot nervously. I don't know why, but something about being alone in that quiet lobby made me feel uneasy. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and I stepped inside. I pressed the button for my floor and leaned back against the wall, watching as the doors started to close. But just before they did, a hand slipped through the gap, stopping them. My heart skipped a beat as the doors slid open again, revealing a man standing there. He was tall, with long black hair that hung down to his shoulders. He was dressed all in black, from his shoes to his coat, which seemed out of place in the warm weather. There was something about him that made my skin crawl, an aura that felt dark and unsettling. He stepped into the elevator without a word, and I instinctively moved to the far corner, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I was so nervous that I pretended I texted someone on my phone. I was so afraid. The elevator doors closed, and the small space felt even smaller. I could feel the man's presence, I was panicking, and I kept my eyes glued to the phone screen, counting the seconds until I could get out of there. When the doors finally opened on my floor, I finally got out of the elevator. I didn't look back, didn't want to know if he was watching me. All I wanted was to get to my room, where I would feel safe. But as I reached my door, I heard it. The sound of footsteps behind me, following me down the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely fit it into the lock. I could feel him getting closer. Just as I managed to unlock the door, I felt a hand grab my arm, strong and tight, pulling me back. Panic surged through me, and without thinking, I swung my elbow back as hard as I could. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I yanked the door open, slipped inside, and slammed it shut, locking it behind me. I didn't dare move, didn't dare even look through the peephole. I was too scared of what I might see. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. I finally gathered the courage to move away from the door and peek out through the small window. The hallway was empty. When my friends came back, I told them what had happened. When my friends came back, I told them what had happened. Later, the police informed us that the man I had encountered had been following other girls too. He had been seen lurking around the building, watching and waiting. And since that day, I have a fear of elevators. We were supposed to have a great time. Just me and my two best friends, Mark and Josh, spending a few days in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. We wanted to escape the city, get away from the noise, and just enjoy some peace and quiet. We found the cabin online, and it seemed like the ideal spot, isolated and surrounded by nature. We didn't think twice before booking it, which was a big mistake. The drive there was long, winding through dense forests and narrow roads, but the scenery was beautiful. When we finally arrived, the cabin looked just like the pictures. It was small, made of old wood, and it sat in a clearing, with the forest looming all around it. As we pulled up, an old man came out of the cabin. He was thin, with gray hair and a face lined with deep wrinkles. He moved slowly. His shoulders hunched as if the weight of the years had bent him. He greeted us with a nod and handed us the keys, his voice low and gravelly. There was something about him that made me uneasy. He was probably just a lonely old man living in the middle of nowhere. After he left, we settled into the cabin. The inside was simple, with creaky wooden floors, a small kitchen, and a few pieces of worn-out furniture. There was a fireplace in the corner, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and old wood. It felt like stepping back in time, away from the modern world. As the day turned to evening, we started to unwind, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. But as the sun began to set, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the living room, just above a dusty shelf, was a small camera, barely noticeable in the dim light. It was pointing directly at us. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at it. Why would there be a camera in a cabin like this? I nudged Mark and Josh, and they noticed it too. We tried to ignore it, convincing ourselves it was just a harmless security measure. The next day, we tried to enjoy ourselves, hiking through the woods and exploring the area, but the thought of that camera kept nagging at me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I could tell Mark and Josh were feeling the same way. The carefree mood of the first day had vanished. That night, our last night in the cabin, we were all sitting in the living room, trying to distract ourselves with a card game, when I noticed something outside the window. At first, I thought it was just a shadow. But as I looked closer, my heart stopped. Standing just outside the window, barely visible in the darkness, was the old man who had rented us the cabin. He was staring directly at us. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching us. None of us knew what to do. We were miles from anywhere, alone in the middle of the woods, with no one to help us. We sped away from the cabin, the headlights cutting through the darkness as the trees blurred past us. We never went back to that cabin. The memory of that last night still haunts me.